Have you ever wondered why the things you once loved suddenly feel meaningless? The hobbies that used to light you up, the music, the painting, the gaming, now feel like chores. It's unsettling, almost like a part of you has died. You look at yourself and think, what's wrong with me? But maybe nothing's wrong. Maybe something deeper is happening inside you, something Jung would say is the first sign of awakening. We'd like to think awakening is all about peace, love, and bliss. But Carl Jung warned that's not the full story. Awakening also dismantles. It tears down the false layers you built around your identity. That's why the things that once felt so exciting start to lose their magic. You're not broken, you're transforming. What feels like loss is actually the ego starting to dissolve, leaving space for something more authentic to take shape. Think about how hobbies often function before awakening. They aren't just fun, they're labels, shortcuts to identity. You're the gamer, the athlete, the artist, and that label gives you a role to play in the world. It's comforting because it says, this is who I am. But what happens when that identity stops working? When the mask you wore so proudly starts to feel heavy, fake, or even irrelevant? Suddenly, the achievements that used to thrill you no longer satisfy. Winning a match doesn't feel like victory. Posting your art online feels hollow. Even recognition from others doesn't land the same way. That's because the part of you that cared so deeply, the ego identity, is beginning to dissolve. The flame that used to keep you running was never meant to last forever. Awakening burns it out to show you what's real. This shift can feel terrifying because the ego convinces us that losing motivation means we're failing. But Jung would say the opposite. It's proof that your psyche is evolving. The hunger for validation, the need to prove yourself, starts to fall away. The activities that once fueled your sense of self no longer feed your soul. And while it feels like emptiness, it's actually a clearing, making room for deeper meaning to enter. But let's be honest, this stage is confusing. If the old hobbies don't light you up anymore, then what's left? Who are you without them? The ego panics here because it can't answer that question. For so long you were defined by what you did, what you achieved, what mask you wore. Now that the mask is slipping, you're standing face to face with a rawer, more vulnerable version of yourself. That's why this period feels so unsettling. Hobbies were never just hobbies. They carried weight. They gave you belonging, pride, and even distraction from deeper pain. Without them, the ground beneath your feet feels shaky, like the map of your life has suddenly been erased. But here's the paradox. Losing the old map is exactly what allows a new, more authentic path to appear. You just can't see it yet. Carl Jung described this collapse as necessary. The persona, the polished version of you, designed to impress, belong, and survive, has cracks. And when those cracks widen, everything tied to that persona loses meaning. It's not failure, it's truth breaking through. The breakdown isn't here to destroy you. It's here to show you the difference between who you pretended to be and who you really are beneath it all. The mistake most people make is thinking this emptiness means they've lost themselves. But what if the opposite is true? What if losing interest in your old hobbies is your soul's way of saying, I'm done with distractions? The void you feel is not a punishment. It's an invitation to look inward, to explore meaning that doesn't depend on recognition, identity, or performance. So the silence you feel, the empty hours where nothing excites you, might be sacred. It's not the death of joy, but the death of illusion. In that stillness, the self begins to breathe. And though it feels uncomfortable, that's where transformation happens. Jung would say you're not losing yourself. You're finally meeting the deeper self, the one that doesn't need masks, labels, or applause to exist. When the silence arrives, it feels heavy at first, like life has been drained of color. But Jung would say this emptiness is stripping away illusions, not killing joy. Many of the hobbies you lost weren't pure passions at all. They were clever ways to escape loneliness, silence anxiety, or patch over pain you didn't want to face. Awakening rips off that cover and dares you to finally meet what's underneath. This is the shadow at work, the buried fears, unspoken grief, and emotions we hide because they don't fit the version of ourselves we want to show the world. Suddenly, your hobbies no longer soothe because they were never really about joy. They were band-aids for your soul. And now, awakening says, enough. Time to sit with the real wound. It's brutal, not because you're broken, but because you've been running from yourself for so long. Painting, gaming, shopping, these were distractions. Ways to avoid staring at the parts of you that hurt, that longed for connection, that feared being seen. Now those distractions fail, leaving you face to face with raw, unfiltered reality. And yeah, it can feel hopeless. Many people say, I don't enjoy anything anymore. What's wrong with me? Jungian psychology flips this story. Nothing is wrong. In fact, this is a breakthrough. For the first time, you're meeting yourself without masks, without distractions. Loneliness, grief, fear, they're no longer enemies. They're teachers guiding your transformation. As you sit with your shadow, you start to realize that fear isn't weakness, grief isn't a curse, and loneliness isn't punishment. The hobbies that once gave you comfort now feel hollow because your soul refuses to settle for illusions. Losing them isn't loss, it's liberation. Your psyche is clearing the field, preparing space for passions born from authenticity, not ego. This stage is often called the dark night of the soul. It's not about despair for despair's sake. It's about dismantling old illusions that shaped your life. Hobbies, goals, pleasures, they crumble because they were tied to the persona, the mask. And while it feels like a kind of death, it's actually a sacred transition, a purging of what no longer serves your evolution. Music might feel like noise, painting might feel forced, gaming might feel like repetition, life might feel drained of color. That's because the old meaning system is collapsing. You can't force it back. You can't fake joy in ways that no longer resonate. Jung called this process negrado, the blackening, the dissolving of false structures before anything new can emerge. In this void, you learn that you are not your hobbies, not your achievements, not the roles you played. When everything external loses meaning, you're invited to touch something deeper, the ground of being itself. The self, as Jung calls it. Not the ego self craving validation, but the deeper self that simply exists, patient, silent, and whole. From this ground, new forms of meaning eventually emerge. But this time they're soul-driven, not ego-driven. Painting might return, not to prove talent, but as meditation. Music might return, not to impress, but to express. And unexpected passions, gardening, journaling, walking in nature can appear, ones you never imagined. They aren't escapes, they're expressions of your being. When individuation begins, joy shifts from doing to achieve into doing to be. The activity itself nourishes you, no masks required. Your lost hobbies were never the end, they were the clearing. And in that clearing, the real self begins to grow. The emptiness isn't a void to fear, it's the soil where your authentic life starts to sprout. At first, this emptiness can feel frightening. You stare at your day, wondering what's worth doing anymore. But Jung would say this is the fertile ground of the soul. The old distractions have fallen away, and for the first time, you can start choosing activities that actually resonate with your true self, not your ego. This is the threshold where authentic meaning begins to emerge. Some passions may return, but differently. Painting might come back, not to impress, but to simply feel, to meditate. Music might return, not for applause, but to let the soul breathe. Even hobbies you never considered before, gardening, journaling, walking in nature, can suddenly feel nourishing. These aren't hobbies to prove something, they're extensions of your being. You begin to notice a shift in motivation. It's no longer about winning, showing off, or being recognized. It's about the joy of being present, the subtle pleasure of expressing yourself without judgment. This is individuation in action, becoming whole, connecting with a deeper self, and letting the outer world take a back seat. And yes, it's scary. The ego screams, "What if I fail? What if no one cares?" But that voice is part of the old system breaking down. The emptiness you feel is the doorway to a richer life. The hobbies that once defined you were never the real you. They were a mask. Now you can start creating from the soul, not the ego. In this new space, experimentation is key. Try writing, photography, cooking, meditative movement, whatever pulls at your attention. Don't force it. Notice what excites your spirit rather than your status or image. Some activities might fail, some might surprise you. That's the point. Exploration itself becomes a teacher, guiding you toward what truly matters. It's a slow, sometimes messy process. You might feel lost or frustrated at first. That's normal. The psyche doesn't rebuild overnight. But each small step, each moment spent creating or simply being, reinforces that you are not your past roles or achievements. You are a self in motion, learning how to honor your inner life. And as you do this, you start to recognize patterns. Which old hobbies were masking pain? Which new pursuits actually feed your soul? This reflection is critical. Jung would call it shadow work. Facing the parts of yourself you've ignored allows you to consciously choose where to invest your energy rather than reacting out of old conditioning. You'll notice your priorities changing. Time once spent chasing recognition now goes into things that feel fulfilling on a deeper level. You may not even label them hobbies anymore. They are expressions of your inner life, ways to connect with yourself rather than impress others. This is the true measure of growth. Doing for being, not for showing. The joy that returns in this phase is subtle, quiet, but infinitely richer. You're no longer dependent on external validation to feel alive. The hobbies of the old self disappear, replaced by soul-aligned activities that bring a sense of peace, flow, and authenticity. It's like learning to walk after years of crawling. You finally inhabit your own body, your own rhythm. And the beauty is, this process is endless. Individuation isn't a destination, it's a journey. Every hobby, every passion, every silent moment is an opportunity to connect deeper with yourself. The emptiness you once feared is now a playground for self-discovery. You're not losing meaning, you're discovering it at a level your old self could never reach. As you experiment, you might find joy in the smallest things. Brewing coffee in silence, doodling on a napkin, or listening to the wind through trees. These little moments aren't flashy, but they remind you life still has flavor. It's proof that meaning isn't gone, it's just hiding behind the old distractions, waiting for you to notice. You may catch yourself smiling over simple stuff, watering a plant, hearing a bird song, or writing a random thought in a journal. These aren't hobbies meant to impress anyone, but tiny rituals that connect you to yourself. Jung would say this is individuation in practice, discovering the self through small, mindful acts of being. And the beauty? You don't need to do it perfectly. You're not trying to win, post, or show off. Baking a cake isn't about Instagram likes. Playing music isn't about applause. It's about pleasure, presence, and the pure satisfaction of creating something just for you. This is freedom disguised as simplicity. Some old hobbies might return to, but in a new form. Gaming could become a way to relax, not compete. Painting might be more like meditation than exhibition. Even walking your neighborhood or doodling on sticky notes counts. The key is that these activities aren't feeding ego, they're feeding your inner life, one small joy at a time. Notice how this changes your mindset. Instead of asking, "Am I doing enough?" you start asking, "Am I feeling enough?" The focus shifts from external achievement to internal fulfillment. Each activity, no matter how small, is a brick in building a self that isn't dependent on praise or recognition. You might even find new interests sprouting from nowhere. Cooking a strange recipe, learning a few chords on guitar, journaling thoughts you never shared. These tiny sparks may feel insignificant at first, but they light the path forward. Jung would remind us, individuation is messy, but each spark is a step toward wholeness. And the emptiness you once feared, it slowly softens. Instead of anxiety or dread, it becomes a space for curiosity. What happens if I try this or this? The void turns into a playground, a laboratory where your soul experiments, discovers, and creates its own rhythm. This process also builds resilience. You realize that joy doesn't have to be loud or grand. It can be tucked in ordinary moments, coffee steam curling in your kitchen, your dog stretching at sunrise, a notebook full of doodles. These small pleasures become proof that life still matters, even without old labels or achievements. And as your self-driven activities grow, you notice patterns. What feeds you? What feels draining? What sparks a light inside? This reflection helps you curate a life that's intentional, not reactive. The old mask fades, but in its place emerges a life built on authenticity, curiosity, and soul-aligned action. By now, the fear of emptiness starts to feel less like a threat and more like a companion. You trust the process. The hobbies you lost weren't failures, they were signposts pointing toward something richer. You're learning to create meaning from your inner world, not the outside. And that's the real magic, discovering life that belongs entirely to you. By now, you've seen that emptiness isn't punishment. It's the soul clearing space for something real. And here's the thing, you're not broken, lost, or failing. You're in transition. That empty feeling? It's a sign your inner world is waking up, inviting you to explore, create, and connect with yourself in ways you never could before. Take a breath and look around your life. Notice the small joys, the sun hitting your coffee mug, a dog's excited bark, the wind on your face. These aren't accidental. They're reminders that life still has meaning, even if the old ways of finding it don't work anymore. You might feel unsure about what to do next. That's okay. Curiosity is your compass. Try journaling, walking, cooking, drawing, or even doing nothing. Let yourself feel, notice, and explore. There's no rush. The soul doesn't hurry, and neither should you. Ask yourself gently, am I doing this for me or for how I look to others? That simple question can shift everything. Old habits crumble when you realize they were about approval, not joy. Now you get to choose differently. Now you get to feel differently. You're learning that joy doesn't need to be loud. Peace doesn't need applause. Happiness can be tucked in tiny moments, ordinary acts, and quiet hours. The things that once felt empty may now become invitations to slow down and enjoy your own company. And notice these shifts ripple outward. You feel calmer, more present. You notice the world differently. Connections deepen because you're connecting first with yourself. The emptiness that felt heavy before is now a canvas, waiting for new, meaningful strokes. Remember, losing your old hobbies or passions wasn't failure. It was preparation, a clearing, a chance to rebuild your life aligned with your soul. Your authentic joy isn't lost, it's just waiting to be discovered in ways that feel real, personal, and yours alone. You're not alone on this path. Thousands are navigating the same emptiness, the same questions, the same uncertainty. Sharing, reflecting, or just noticing that connection can be grounding. You're part of a larger journey, a collective awakening, even if it feels solitary at times. So if you're stuck in the void, grieving what you lost, breathe. Allow yourself to feel, experiment, and explore. Trust that something new is emerging. You'll find passions, hobbies, and rituals that feed your soul, not your image. Step by step, day by day, life regains its color. And finally, know this. It's normal to feel lost sometimes. It's normal to question, to grieve, to pause. But within that normality lies your power. You're awakening, discovering, growing. And when you look back, you'll see this journey wasn't empty. It was preparation for a life that truly belongs to you.